You would never imagine an old letter could wake up an entire family that abandoned you. Early morning in a quiet house on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. The first light of day filtered through the hospital room window. At the bedside of my mother, who was battling a serious illness for 6 months, I discovered a secret letter that would change everything. I stood silently beside my mother's bed, feeling lonely. Life continued as usual outside the window of the small house, but in this room, time seemed to stop with only the soft breathing of my mother Margaret and my own tired heartbeat. The dry smell of medicine and the heavy still air had become constant companions. My mother had been seriously ill for nearly 6 months. At first, everyone was there. Though also weakened by age, my father tried to cheer her up. My brother and sister, each busy with their work and family, would occasionally visit, bringing flowers, offering a few words of comfort, then disappearing again. I was the one who stayed day and night. Gradually, those visits became less frequent. The messages became brief, busy with work. Daughter is tired. Unexpected business trip. Then silence. Calls went unanswered or only promises were made and then left unanswered. Finally, they disappeared completely as if they had never existed during this challenging period. The house felt strangely empty. The armchair my brother had once sat on was now empty. The bottle of perfume on the dressing table, a birthday gift from my sister, now evoked only memories of distance. All that was left was me, my drugged-out mother, and Susan, the faithful housekeeper who had been with the family for more than 20 years. Susan was old, slightly bent, but her eyes were still bright and kind. She kept the house tidy, cooked light meals for my mother, and silently observed my deep sadness. She spoke very little, but her presence was a solid support in my mind. One rainy afternoon, the sound of water drops on the roof made the atmosphere even sadder. I sat on the floor beside my mother's bed, feeling exhausted and hopeless. Why did they all leave? Why was this burden left only to me? Tears rolled down my cheeks. Suddenly, I felt a warm hand gently shaking my shoulder. Mrs. Susan stood there holding an old envelope. The paper yellowed as if it had been hidden away for a long time. "This letter is for you," she said softly. "Your mother gave it to me a long time ago, saying she would give it to you when you felt most alone." My hands shook as I opened the envelope. The words were right. Before me, Margaret Lawson, the handwriting still elegant but faded with age. I took a deep breath and began to read. My mother's words rang in my ears like soft music. She wrote of her boundless love for me, her youngest child, whom she had worried she hadn't spent enough time with when I was young. She clarified that she understood my father and siblings were only concerned with their own lives and finances and didn't want to shoulder this difficult period. There was no resentment, just a calm acknowledgement as if she had seen it all coming. Then Mom revealed a secret, a savings account that only she, Susan, and I knew about. She told me to use it to care for her in her final days and to leave the rest for me. "Dear Michael," she wrote, "don't think you're alone. You've always been my rock. I know you can get through anything. My love will be with you forever." Folding the letter, my tears were no longer tears of sadness, but hope and emotion. I looked at my mother sleeping, then looked out the window where the sunset was gradually falling. My family's world might continue, but my world had changed. I still stand alone by my mother's bed, but the emptiness has lessened. I have her love in her words, the truth to rely on, and I know exactly what to do. The weight of responsibility is still there, but now it is lit by purpose and the legacy of love she left me. After reading my mother's letter, I did not leave Margaret's bed, but my thoughts became clearer. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, I woke up with a new determination. I needed to take care of my mother not only emotionally, but in every way, medically, financially, and spiritually. The first thing I did was call Susan. "We need to plan for the care costs this morning," I said, tearful and full of responsibility. She nodded silently, her eyes full of understanding. We began sorting through the mounting medical bills, hospital bills, prescriptions, blood pressure, and oxygen machine rentals. My mother had signed a power of attorney for me, but when it came to the paperwork, I realized the gravity of the task. My heart pounded whenever I picked up the phone to call the hospital billing office. The receptionist's voice was polite, but the answer was always, "We'll get back to you soon." Sometimes I found out that this payment had not been paid, that payment had not been transferred to the insurance. Every time I looked at the numbers, I felt more pressure than ever, but remembering my mother's words, "You are my support," I took a deep breath and told myself to be strong. Meanwhile, the phone rang continuously. It was from my brother and sister. "Sorry, we're dealing with some work." I blurted out, doing some work or leaving, but held back. Arguing wouldn't solve anything. I replied, briefly, "Mom needs money for medicine urgently. If you can't help, please don't bother." Ultimately, I knew Susan and I were the only ones I could trust. Susan suggested calling a private ambulance to take Mom to a better nursing home with 24-hour nurses. I looked at Mom's tired face and the power of attorney in my hand and nodded. It was a big step from home care to professional care. I called the facility, arranged a transfer, and signed up for physical therapy so Mom wouldn't lose the last of her strength. In the afternoon, when the ambulance stopped in front of the house, I helped my mother sit up, her eyes filled with confusion. I whispered, "Don't worry, Mom. I'm always here." She only smiled weakly, but her hand still held me tightly. Before going out the door, I turned back to look at the house, which used to be filled with family laughter, now only silence. I let out a soft sigh, but my heart felt strangely peaceful. The car took Mom away, and Susan and I sat in the empty living room. She poured me a warm tea, then said Michelle and Andrew called me and said they could help a little. But I don't know when the money will be transferred. I just nodded, determined to take care of it myself. In my heart, I said, even if it's just Mom and Susan, I won't let Mom suffer. As the sun set behind the trees, I sat at my desk and reviewed my mother's papers and letters again. I knew the road ahead would be arduous: insurance claims, nursing care, and missing my family. But I had a strategy: the financial resources Margaret had left me, and most of all, my mother's unconditional love, a strength no one could take away. I closed my eyes and promised my mother that I would persevere. Many days after the transfer, the new room in the nursing home became more familiar. The balcony overlooked the small flower garden where my mother Margaret loved to water when she was healthy. Now, under the morning sunlight, the chirping of birds and the bright colors of the flowers touched my heart, somewhat soothing my fatigue. Every morning, I went to help my mother with her physical therapy. Watching her take her first faltering steps, my hands trembled with emotion. "Come on, Mom," I whispered. "You're strong." A tearful smile appeared on her face, as if to say she had never felt so proud. During the days of taking care of my mother here, I realized that I was not alone. The nurses, the doctors, and the patients in the same situation all shared their own stories. They encouraged me, telling little stories about human resilience. A nurse called me strong guy. An old patient told me about the daughter who cared for him daily. Those voices not only reduced my loneliness, but also fueled my fire. When my mother fell asleep at night, I returned to the old quiet house. Now, it no longer felt stuffy, but full of beautiful memories. I sorted through family photos, the rare happy moments before the illness came, the laughter at Christmas when my mother taught me to cook apple pie. They all reminded me that family love still exists, even if not everyone is around. I also started keeping a diary, writing down all my thoughts and feelings. Whenever I felt sad, I would open my mother's letter and reread it, repeating each word. "You are my support." Those words echoed in my head whenever I wanted to give up. Gradually, the sadness turned into motivation, helping me to keep trying. And then one day, a phone call came out of the blue. My sister said that the company had finally agreed to cover some of my mother's medical expenses. Her voice was hesitant. "Michael, I'm sorry for being so late. I know I was wrong." I was silent for a second, then replied, "Thank you. Mom will be so happy to hear this." Those words were not only for my sister, but also to remind me that forgiving and understanding others' limitations is also a way to preserve family relationships. Then one peaceful afternoon, my mother walked out into the small garden. She looked up at the sky, took a deep breath, then turned to me, her eyes shining with simple joy. I held her hand, feeling the warmth that had only existed in letters. I smiled. "Are you feeling better?" She nodded slightly, smiling kindly. In that moment, all the efforts, all the tears were rewarded. I still keep my promise to my mother, to persevere to the end. But now I understand more. This journey is not just a burden, but also an opportunity for me to be stronger, more tolerant, and to cherish every moment with my loved ones. A week later, I noticed that peace was returning to my life. Mom was getting used to her physical therapy schedule, and the doctor said she was doing well. She was walking more steadily. Her spirits were higher. I no longer had to worry about medication or insurance every hour. Everything was in order. Instead, I sat with Mom, talking about old memories, looking through family photos, or juicantly holding hands. In the process, I learned many things. The strength that comes from perseverance, the tolerance when looking back at the mistakes of loved ones, and the value of cherishing every moment together. I also discovered a new joy, writing to relieve stress, recording each step of my mother's recovery as a proud journey. The diary entries helped me soothe my soul and became a testament to the sacred mother-child relationship. Then, one sunny afternoon, when my mother and I were sitting on the balcony, she turned around and smiled gently. "You know, I'm so proud." I choked up and hugged her. That was the moment I understood clearly that love and faith will always guide us no matter how difficult it is. My mother and I's story is not just about the burden of caregiving or lonely tears. It is also a journey to find strength, tolerance, and the value of family love. When we give, we receive. When we understand, we heal. And what about you? Have you ever felt like you had to carry everything alone? Looking back, what helped you persevere? Please share your story in the comments section to spread faith and strength to each other. If you find this video meaningful, don't forget to click subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any upcoming touching stories. Thanks for joining us.